All right, today we've decided we're going to get rid of the Department of Education. I don't know why this is such a ridiculous idea. It's only been really in existence since 1979. We'll tell you a little bit of the history of it coming up in a few minutes. It would save us $100 billion. Take a look at this graph. 81% of the department's spending goes back to the states. So let me just get this right. Only the federal government would do this. I take my local money and send it to Washington, and then they send it back. That doesn't make sense to me. Here to tell us how we can do this and what some of our alternatives are is the director of the tax policy studies at the Cato Institute. We have Chris Edwards, and of course, he's the author of Downsizing for the Federal Government, and Stephen Dubner, author of Super Freakonomics. Okay, Chris, let me start with you. This is such a sacred cow, and yet it's a relatively new department.
That's right. Jimmy Carter created the Department of Education in 1979 under pressure from the National Education Association and other teachers' unions. Reagan came into office in 1980 promising to abolish it. He called it Jimmy Carter's little boondoggle. Unfortunately, he was not able to abolish it.
How did it gain so much power in just that short period of time?
Well, the funding started in 1965 when it was part of another department. And all the states unionized their workforces in the 1960s, so the teachers' unions got a lot of power starting in the 1960s. It's a crazy system. We spend hundreds of billions of dollars on K-12 education now, the federal taxpayers have, over 40 years, and test scores, as you showed, have been absolutely flat for 40 years. So obviously, you know, all this money is not helping.
How can you cut this? And for instance, if we cut the Department of Education, how about poor states? What happens to poor states?
Well, oddly, the main reason for creating all this federal education money originally was a program called Title I. The money's supposed to go to the poor states and districts. But I live in the highest income county in the country, Fairfax County in Virginia. The school I send my kids to in Fairfax County gets this Title I money for disadvantaged kids. So the money that's supposed to go to the poor districts now actually spread all over the country to the richest counties, just because that's how Congress works. Every member of Congress wants to get a share.
I have to tell you, I think we are so screwed up, and Stephen, maybe you can address this a little bit. I think we're so screwed up. We build these palaces. They're educational palaces. I mean, you go into any nice town, and the nicest building will be the schools. That's not necessary. I mean, I got a good education. I went to a private school. You know, my dad worked at the bakery. We had to work it off to go to the school. We never wasted. Had to use both sides of the paper. I remember when I went to I think it was 9th grade, and it was the first time I'd ever been in a public school. It was like it was Vegas.
You grew up in a nice zip code then. Where I was, it was okay. Where I am now, New York City, public schools are certainly not palaces. Here's what I would say. I'm going to leave the question of whether to get rid of the Department of Ed to people with bigger sledgehammers than me. That starts to become a political issue, and what I do is hopefully kind of the opposite of politics. What I do know, however, is the idea of having the federal government setting a lot of education policy way down the line seems to not be a good idea, as you've been talking about here. When we look at test scores, when we look at ROI, if you want to think like a business person, look at ROI, we see we're spending more and more money and we're getting less and less output. Now, I think here's the thing. If you ask a lot of educators, a lot of the honest educators, what matters most in a school? Okay, you got classroom size, dollars per student. What matters most? They'll all say, at least all the ones that I've talked to and who do research, and they say one thing: teacher skill. It's all that really matters, teacher skill.
But you know what? We're going to a break here, so let me go to a break, because that's where I want. They have rubber rooms in New York. This is insanity when you look at what these things are doing. That's the problem. Good teachers can't teach, and we've. You work for the New York Times?
I did.
You did. Why'd you leave?
Partly because I didn't want a union job.
Why?
Why? Because there's the deadwood problem. The people who do a lot of work are competing with the people who don't do a lot of work but who are paid the same or more.
That makes everybody mediocre. You've got these teachers who really care. There are great teachers out there, but they can't get past the deadwood that is there. Do you know my daughter, I think in 4th grade, she was taught never buy anything from Japan because, you know, the Japanese are our enemies. What are you talking about? She was so old and had tenure, you couldn't fire her. She was still living in World War II stuff. Back in just a second. She really did. She
Yeah, wait, this kid is, which year? How old?
Hello, America. Hello, America. 1979 was the year when Congress passed and President Carter signed into law the Department of Education. 1979, this guy did it. That's when a separate executive department was set up. Before that, it was just in the Department of Interior, and it was small, and then it began to be represented in the cabinet. Since then, our education system, has it gotten better or worse? Is there any reason to believe maybe we're wasting a lot of money? Let me show you something here in New York. We found something called rubber rooms. These are rooms where teachers go and they don't teach, but they do get paid. There are now 675 teachers in 8 rubber rooms set up through New York City alone. Last year, the city paid its rubber room teachers $40 million in salary. 40. They do nothing. They sit there and make money. Watch.
What the rubber room is like a jail for teachers.
If there's an allegation made against anybody, before they even find out the facts, they send it to
what is literally a holding facility.
The charges have not been substantiated, but we're here in this purgatory of exiled educators.
Months, sometimes years later.
But there's no work, there's no duties. You just have to be there. You get your full pay.
And there's some people say, oh, you're so lucky, you know, Mrs. Tarasso. You're sitting and doing nothing, and you're getting your salary. Don't fool yourself. There isn't one person in that room that thinks they're lucky.
Good. Then quit. Then quit. Have some self-respect and go get a job where you're working. These people sit there and continue to do nothing. They collect their checks. Here's 2 examples of rubber room occupants who are just tortured people. First one, Alan Rosenfeld. There he is. He's in Queens. He doesn't teach since he was accused of making lewd comments to students. Since 2001, he's been pulling his teaching salary of $100,049. And then he also sits there in the rubber room and oversees his $7.8 million real estate portfolio and law practice. Have some self-respect, man. Now, we also have Francisco Olivares, this guy. He's a math teacher, but he's not teaching math after allegedly impregnating and marrying a 16-year-old student. I don't know how you allegedly marry a student, but he did. He also allegedly sexually molested 2, not 1, 2 12-year-old pupils a decade later. Well, that... I feel bad for him sitting in the rubber room collecting $94,145 a year doing nothing. In some places, you'd be in jail for allegedly impregnating a 16-year-old girl and or marrying her and then the sexual molestation thing. But not with it, not in New York. No. For his efforts, he's bringing in over $94,000 a year. The Department of Education, mind you, blames the teachers' union for the problem. The teachers' union blames the Department of Education. I say we eliminate both of them. Problem fixed. Chris Edwards, Director of Tax Policy Studies at the Cato Institute, and Stephen Dubner, author of Freakonomics. Okay, where am I wrong?
Well, the solution here is to abolish monopoly unions or collective bargaining in the public sector. That sounds radical for New York, but New York, New Jersey, California have very high unionization in the public sector. 3/4 of the states have collective bargaining, but 1/4 of the states, 12 states, have no collective bargaining in the public sector. So states like Virginia, where I live, there are no teachers unions. North Carolina, no teachers unions. They can join voluntary associations, and that's fine, but no unions.
Seems to me that we had pretty good pretty good record of schools. Not everywhere. I mean, there are places where you have to make sure that, you know, we're taking care of students. But it seems like we were doing pretty good with the Greatest Generation. Then in the 1960s, what changed?
Well, one thing that changed is the feminist revolution. Women, you know, it used to be that 55% of all female graduates in this country became school teachers. The best and brightest women became school teachers. It was one of the only professions that was open to them. When other professions became open to them, they could go into law, medicine. That's wonderful for society, wonderful for those women, certainly. The best and brightest were no longer all becoming teachers, and so the overall teacher talent level fell. The other thing is, if you went to sleep 200 years ago and woke up today, one of the few places you'd recognize is a teaching classroom in the United States.